Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Fat Muscle Project podcast. I'm John Gorman, one of your hosts today. We got Lisa Franz in the house, all the way from South America. Lisa, what's going on? How are you?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's we're recording this. It's March, and in Missouri, it changes every 10 minutes. It's like we might have some flurries, we might have some rain, and then it may be 80 degrees outside. So right now I'm wearing sweatpants with some shorts underneath, and who knows, I might have shorts on at
Just
the end of the
prepared for
day.
anything.
Yeah, yeah. I'm excited. We were just talking before the show started, going over these show notes, and this is going to be a really fun topic. You've done a great job putting this together, maximizing training recovery. We're going to do a huge deep dive on this because it's so crucial and so important. I'm just going to let you take the reins here. This is a topic that I think a lot of people they're not going to find quote unquote sexy. It's kind of like the whole sleep component and the other things that work, and people are always looking for magic pills. But I could say this to our listeners now: if you're looking to maximize your leanest, most muscular physique, your best performing physique, this is probably one of the most important episodes we may ever do. So make sure that you tune in, take some notes if you want. And of course, everything's in the show notes. We put everything there as we go through. So Lisa, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Well, you already touched on why we wanted to make a whole episode about this topic, because in order to reach our maximum potential, we need to constantly push ourselves, our own limits and everything. And every now and then, or probably on a regular basis, we get to a point where we're feeling not recovered enough, so we can't push it that hard in training. Or, of course, most people know that we need rest days, but why is that? How many do we need in order to have that optimal recovery? And in order to find that out, or I think an important part as well is to recognize that that changes throughout the course of our lives and throughout the course of our training experience and training history, training age. And that's particularly the first point that we wanted to talk about. So outside of training, there are many things affecting how hard we can actually push it in our training. And the very first thing we need to think about is something that we spend a lot of time with, and that's our jobs. So maybe you can kind of explain why that plays a role, like if someone has a sedentary job as opposed to someone being in a labor type job, physical labor type job, etc.
Yeah. So as a coach, I know personally, since 2007, I'm 17 years doing this now. I've worked with a whole host of people, whether they work office jobs, they work from home, they're not really on their feet much, to working with people that literally work overnights and they're putting in 60, 70 hours a week and running on low sleep, to people that work very labor extensive jobs where they're laying floors, or they're working construction and they're working 10-hour days, literally working their knuckles to the bone. And then they have to go to the train and gym, they have to take in food and get everything else on point to be able to support muscle growth there. So I always find out, okay, what's someone's training availability, what's their schedule look like, and I always find all that out first with a client. And I've noticed over time the people that make the best results are the people that we have to maximize the recovery, right? A certain amount of days off depends on, if you're a construction worker and you're working 40, 50 hours a week, 10 hours a day, you can't train 6 days a week. Like, it's just not going to be optimal. Your body has to recover. So the best results I've always gotten with clients is always revolved around maximizing how many days off they have. I almost start backwards. I look at everything and I'm like, okay, this person needs at least 3 days off a week. So we're going to maximize their training on four. And we'll do a little bit more on this, but on scheduling and stuff like that. But I always find out their days of lowest sleep and highest stress and most work, and those are their off days. And I start backwards and I go from there. And I program all their other training days on the days they have the most sleep. They have the least amount of work, the least amount of stress. And that's how I do it as a coach. And that is something I didn't do 10 years ago. I didn't pay attention, probably because I was younger. We'll talk about age here in a little bit. I was younger and I just was run and gun, and I would train 6 days a week, and you just made it work and you felt great. Long story short is, the longer you do that, the less recoverability, easy for me to say, you have, and the less progress you make, and the more injuries rack up. So long answer on something. It's always something I start with clients and I work backwards.
I love that. And I think indirectly, you kind of said what it's all about. It's about finding that optimal recoverable volume. So in the literature, it's often differentiated between maximal recoverable volume, which is still a good volume to have, but kind of a little bit higher than what's actually necessary. And then, of course, we have the insufficient volume overall, where you're not really eliciting training adaptations, or you have a training volume that is too high. And so what classifies as too high differs from person to person, as we were saying, from their and even within that person, from whichever state of life that they're in. But I think what's important for people to understand is, at least like when, and depending on how advanced the person is that's listening to this, but initially when people start with strength training, I think many people think what's making us stronger is the training in and of itself. And while that is true to the extent that, yes, that is the stimulus, the adaptation to it. So the fact that your body wants to get stronger to be able to deal with the stimulus better the next time happens when we rest, happens when we sleep, when we eat. It doesn't happen during the training. So that is just in general why we need to have rest at all. And initially, when you start off, or if you're not really doing much else other than training in your life, you might be a college student in your early 20s, and you don't have much going on apart from that, then you can, as you said, push it hard 6 days easily. Sometimes even if you have a good training split, even 7 days, and you don't need any off days. But as life goes on, as other stressors increase, this maximal recoverable volume shifts and changes. And so maybe that's where you can dive into training age as well.
Yeah, it's something, and I want our listeners, if you're new to the show and you don't know what volume is, it's pretty much just an easy way to look at it instead of getting too scientific, is because if anyone understands the scientific side of volume, you don't need us to explain it. So at a basic level, for those that don't understand, it's really just the total amount of work that you're doing in the gym, right? The easiest way for me to explain it to my clients is, hey, here's your total sets for your workout. Like that's your total volume. And then I look at how many total times they're doing sets for chest for the week, right? You want to see the overall work that you're doing, not just per workout, but kind of per week, which we'll get into. So, but back to your question, training age. So that's something that's super important for people to understand. It's not necessarily tied to your age that you are, it's how many years you've been training. So that's why it's called a training age. And someone that started later in life, I was 30 when I started, like got real serious anyway. My training age is like 16 years of being very serious because I'm 46 now. But I know a lot of people my age that have a training age of 30 because they started when they're 16, right? So training age is something that you have to take into account. And here's why. The longer you've been training, the harder it is to gain muscle and the more things a lot of people try to keep eking out that extra muscle growth or the extra strength. And that's where you do things like you start training body parts multiple times a week to eke out as much muscle gain as you can, right? The thing is, the longer you've been training, the more susceptible you are to injuries and the more you have to really think about recovery. So it's one of those things I see people that want to bring their legs up. They're training legs 3 times a week, and you can do that in short bursts. But if you've been training for 16 years, for example, or 20 years, and you start training legs 3 times a week, you're already in a point to where you have to watch for injuries because you've beaten your legs, your hips, your knees, like you've beaten everything up. And I always see the injuries happen with people with a higher training age, right? More than likely. I mean, everyone gets injured. Newbies get injured, right? They just, freak stuff happens. But it seems like their bodies are a little bit more resilient because they haven't been put through hell. So if you're listening and you're a little bit new, you've got a little bit more leeway. If you're listening and you're like me and you've got, I would say, more than 5 to 7 years in, you're starting to be pretty advanced. Your body's been through hell. Your shoulders, like that's actually the number one thing I see go in people that have a training age over 5, 6, 7, 8 years is they start to have some shoulder issues. And that's just from constant wear and tear. So it's one thing I want people to realize: the longer you've been in this, the more you need to really think about your recovery. and I don't know if we're going to talk about splits later, but I can tell you for people that are older in their training age, the best split I have found hits body parts about every fifth day or so. So like it used to be I would try and hit it every third or fourth day, like chest, for example. You might hit chest or you know what, shoulders. Everybody wants to bring their shoulders up. You know, maybe hit shoulders on a Monday and Thursday. I found better schedules are about every 5 days. And that's because your joints and tendons take 4 to 5 days to recover. Your muscle doesn't. Your muscle's ready to be trained again 3 days after you train it. But your joints and tendons need 4 to 5 days. So if you really think about a recovery standpoint, you want to train your muscle often enough to keep stimulating it the most you can throughout the course of a year, but you also don't want to overtax your joints because that's where injuries happen. And a lot of people close to me, you know, they're out with shoulder injuries or they're out with knee injuries, and it's just from chronic overuse. And unfortunately, a lot of people like, I don't regret anything because I went all in. And you know, we can't help when no one gets injured on purpose. Like, but if you think about it going in and you take this stuff that we're giving you, I'm hoping that it's going to help people recover better and they can avoid more injuries. Now, knock on wood on my desk here, I haven't really had any significant injuries because I am paying so close attention to this. All my training is set up predicated on honestly injury prevention, training hard enough and often enough, but not too hard and too often to where I'm worried about injury as I start to get closer to 50.
Yeah, I mean, that's just again the beautiful explanation of that maximal or optimal recoverable volume. I think the danger is sometimes that um, we make a lot of progress in the beginning of our journey, or most people do anyway. And then at some point, if you're like a year and a half or 3, 4, 5 in, progress slows down. So often what we
Yeah.
think is what's going to be better, more volume. And yes, of course, the literature does support that, you know, more volume is better or does help improve, I guess, the adaptation rate, or you can help you achieve your goals faster, especially when it comes to hypertrophy. Strength is a little bit different, I believe. But anyway, so we add more volume, and then time goes on, and you're, I don't know how many years into your training career, and you're like, well, I'm already doing 6 days. I want to achieve more, but where do I go from here? Some people start doing 2-a-day things, especially if you are a competitor, and then add the stress of dieting to that, which is also very, very, and we're going to talk more about that when it comes to the recovery later, but I mean, that's an extra stressor for all your tendons, your tissues, and so on.
Mm.
So that's kind of the problem. And I have actually seen it several times where when we reduce training volume, people see better adaptations, not just
Yes.
for the stress overall, but so again, really like finding that optimal recoverable volume for you is so crucial, or for you at that time of life that you're in at the moment.
Yeah. Are you wanting to go into what we would recommend? And so here's the thing. No one can recommend the exact volume. Like we're not going to do that. Is that something that you want to go into later on in the show or do
A
you want
little
to?
bit, yeah, I think so,
Okay, good.
especially when it comes to, yeah, I think it would be good just to give people an idea, but as you say,
I
I
agree.
like you preface it by you can't standardize that by any means. We don't know what someone, how
Yeah.
old someone is, or what their schedule looks like. But one other note that we had there is why is it different, or how is it different for people that train and that are natural as opposed to someone who might be on hormone replacement therapy or
Yes.
anything like that?
Yeah, that's something I want everyone to pay attention to. Most people listening to the show, they're not going to be on any kind of testosterone replacement therapy. They're not going to be assisted. They're going to be mostly natural athletes. There's a time and place for all of it. I'm not going to judge anyone. I've had clients over the years that have done anything and everything. Um, but I want to touch on people that are on testosterone replacement therapy versus people that aren't. So understanding your testosterone and your free test is super, super important. I believe episode 16, we did a deep dive on labs and what you want all your markers to be. And we covered testosterone and free tests there. Just real quick, you want to make sure if you're natural, you're at least somewhere in the middle of your range. Like ranges depend on the labs you get and where you get them. But like a good range that I like to at least see natural men at is hopefully we're above 550, closer to 600 and higher. It depends on your dieting history. With a free test, somewhere in the middle of the road of your ranges. So just think middle of the road at least for optimal recovery, or for actually that's for minimal recovery. Women, same thing, middle of the road. Most labs may say between 4 and 60. nanograms per deciliter. You want to hopefully be above 20. I see a lot of people under 20. You're just not going to recover well. And the same thing with your free T might be between 0 and 4 measured. The closer you can get to 2, the better. Now, assisted folks or people that are on testosterone replacement therapy with prescription from their doctor, you're going to be able to be in middle of the road or higher. Your free testosterone is going to be higher. Your recoverability is going to be much, much, much better. And remember, we're not talking about testosterone replacement therapy for advanced physique enhancement. We're talking about just to get your levels to a healthy stage, right? And some people can go higher. You might see people at 800, 900 if they want to go there, and doctors are okay with that. My point is, it knocks cortisol down. Your sleep's generally better. It does all these things, but your testosterone total and your free T is always going to be better on TRT. So you're able to get by with more. You're going to gain more muscle. You're going to retain more muscle when dieting, just regenerate or build new tissue a lot better. So understanding that, those are the people that can actually push a little bit harder, especially as they get later in their training age. Versus if you're natural and you're starting to see the signs of under recovery, a little bit lower testosterone levels as you age, which is normal, those are the things you have to pay attention to. So, if I can get labs, I try and get labs for anyone that I feel like I need labs. And matter of fact, I'm getting ready to start someone today. He's an older guy in his 60s, and I didn't want to. He wants to build muscle. Well, I didn't want to. I didn't want to build him a plan until I saw his total testosterone and his free T. Because why would I go build this plan and have this guy train 5 days a week if his testosterone was too low and his free T was too low? So that's something a lot of people aren't checking, or they don't feel like they're qualified to check. Or if you're out there listening and it's your labs, make sure you look at those if you're natural. So that kind of sets everything up. So
Yeah, and I want the women to listen to this as well, because that is just as applicable there as well. That
100%.
we still, like, even if we, naturally have lower testosterone levels, but still don't tune out just because it's testosterone and you think it's only got to do with men's hormones. The other part, which I think is, or where I think it's important to listen to, is like, if you're a coach and you perhaps have awesome testosterone levels, or you mostly work with enhanced people, and then you take on a natural athlete, take that into consideration, that they're going to need very different prescriptions or very different sort of training outline than someone who is enhanced.
Yeah. The best coaches understand all different forms of clients. So we all see, listen, there's going to be coaches out there that are fucking bro and they're running every steroid under the sun, and they've trained and they've made amazing progress, and they try and set up every client they have on the exact type of training that they learned from. You'll never be a great coach if you do that. You have to understand how to set a plan up for all these different individuals. People with bad genetics, for example, like, you've got all these different factors. That's the art of coaching. But I want to get off that soapbox because that's a whole deep dive. We don't want a whole can of worms there. So yeah. So now I think people kind of understand a little bit about recovery as we get a little deeper into the show.
Yeah, so what I would like to do next is, if someone notices that they are sore all the time, or that they might be overreaching too far in the sense of pushing themselves too hard, like, where do we tweak first? What would be your attempt? You mentioned already, okay, you might cut down a whole day, or would it potentially do just to cut down on sets or increasing rest, or like, where can people start normally?
So the term overreaching, and we've got supercompensation in the notes. It's supercompensation of training, really, same thing. That's when remember, your volume is how much work you're doing, how much sets, right? Like, when your volume goes high, or it gets to the point where it's high, and then your intensity goes high, and you have both these metrics are high. At some point, your body's going to tap and give. Your central nervous system's going to tap and give, and you start to have kind of crappy sleep, and you're sore all the time, and your motivation to go train is low. That's because you're overreached. And I push clients to that point on purpose so I can purposely do a deload. I learned that in powerlifting world. Like, that's what we all did to get stronger. So the first thing I do is, when someone starts to feel the effects of overreaching, I do a deload immediately. And like I said, if they're not a client of mine and they're just coming to me, it's an immediate deload. So where I have them just train a couple days a week, maybe an upper day and a lower day. And I tell them, hey, just go into the gym, just go get a pump and have fun. Whatever you feel like training that looks like fun, just train. Just train and have fun. Get a nice big fat pump because we all love that. We're all a bunch of bros, and get in and out in 30, 40 minutes and just do it twice a week and then take off all the other days. And a lot of people worry about that because they are so used to training and breaking their body down. But your body's trying to tell you it's way smarter than our brains. It's trying to tell you, hey, I am tapped out. I need a break. The goal of a deload and time off is to come back stronger. So after you're rested, your joints are more recovered, your muscles recovered, you're mentally more recovered, your cortisol's down. Now you come back the week after a deload and you're fresh, you're ready to push hard again, which is going to translate to more muscle growth or better muscle retention if you're dieting down. So I try to implement a deload right out of the gate. Now, there are times where you just throw in an extra day off a week too. So like if somebody's getting overreached really quickly, it could be because of things like low sleep, a lot of work hours, stress is real high at work, stress is high at home. Um, I might bump them down from 5 days a week to 3 days a week for 3 or 4 weeks just to give their body a nice little break. And they're still training. And what you said earlier makes so much sense. And I wish people could grasp this. I've got people that have made better gains on 3 days a week than they did on five because they were recovering better. So even though they were training five, they weren't getting the recovery they needed. They weren't making any progress. Boom, we move them down to 3 days a week and they're looking freaking amazing. Their training's better because they feel better and they're squeezing all the lemon out of the lemon, right? They're making as much lemon juice out of the lemon as they can and they're maximizing that. And it's just one of those things to where I wish people could grasp it. It's hard for me to grasp. And like, I'm sure it's hard for you too, Lisa, like, especially when you were growing your glutes and your hamstrings. It's such a great job. I'm sure it's hard to like think, okay, I need a deload or cutting back, right? Like, we're just not built for that.
100%. And I think that needs to direct a coach also. Like if you find that your client is someone who just loves going into the gym almost on a daily basis or maybe 5, 6 times a week, you can deload them also, or you can reduce their volume rather, in other ways other than saying like if they're really panicking about like, oh, reducing their days down to 3 days per week or so. It could just be that if you are currently training 60, 70 minutes every time, reducing that time down to 45 minutes perhaps, or particularly when someone does have a hypertrophy focus, okay, let's see, what are the most taxing exercises here? For instance, deloads, deadlifts, or squats, or whatever, something that is really hard on your central nervous system. How can we potentially replace that with something that is not quite as taxing for you? So just on the long term, I totally agree with, an immediate deload if someone is really overtrained per se. But when it comes to monitoring that long term, let's just say they feel super sore every 2, 3 weeks, and then clearly their volume is just way too high because that shouldn't be. So in those instances, I think like find out what type your client is, or what kind of person you are. Do you prefer to go 3 times per week, pushing it really, really hard? Or are you someone you need that routine of going into the gym 5 times a week, and you would rather shorten those times or make it, I don't want to say lighter because that's not what I mean in terms of weight, but make it less stressful for your central nervous system. But yeah, 100%, it is so difficult to sometimes grasp that less is more.
Yeah.
Or can be.
I've got a client. His name's Jeff. I won't put his last name out there. He's probably listening right now. He's got a huge stretch of travel coming up, and we're working really hard to add muscle to his frame. And he's I can't remember how old he is. He's somewhere close to my age, I believe. And his training was taking, if I remember right, maybe 2 hours, 2 hours, 15 minutes to get it all in. Cause I had the volume in there and I had multiple days in there. And he was telling me, he's like, hey, I've got so much coming up for travel and work. What's a way that we can possibly adjust, but I still want to be able to gain muscle? So what I did was I switched him to higher reps and much shorter rest periods to try and really cut his workout in half. And most people hear that, especially the bro coaches, are like, oh, you can't cut someone's time in half in the gym. So here's what happened. He took, I think he worked down to like a minute rest. I actually told him, like, dude, I go 30, 45 seconds rest. And I'm like going, right. You can do that. You can shorten your rest. You can up your reps and lower your weight, but you have to train to the point of failure. So that's the thing. It's just higher reps to failure. And that's a whole other beast in and of itself. Like it's no joke if you've never done it. But if you need more time, that's kind of a little quick hack that I just thought of that made me think of Jeff.
I love that. That's a really great advice, and particularly also the emphasis on, in that case, you have to push it to failure for sure. And
Yeah,
I don't know what you work with in terms of your clients, if you give them a certain RIR or rate of perceived
I
exertion or
do.
percent, whatever. But I mean, that can be another way to reduce training intensity if you are constantly sore. Maybe just taking a look at, should I push every exercise to failure? Maybe not. Maybe we can pick one exercise per session that you are pushing to failure, or some of your accessory work, where like a bicep curl or whatever, right? But some of the other things that are more taxing, that we make sure that you're actually sticking with the recommendation of your intensity there. So like reducing it maybe from a 1 RIR or 0 RIR to 2 or maybe a 3 or so that you're not as fatigued that way.
Yeah, I like RPE. That's the perceived exertion. So on a scale of 1 to 10 is the easiest way to explain that for our folks that don't know. When you do a set of, say, chest press and you're trying to get to 12 reps, you want to be able to use a rep and say you're going to hit a 10 out of 10. That's where you do all 12 reps and you fail on the 12th rep and you can't get another one. Like that's 100%. As a general rule of thumb, and the research supported this, at least, within the last 5 years, I don't think it's changed. But for most people, if you train at a 9 out of 10 RPE, meaning about a rep shy of hitting failure, to where to get that last rep, you're going to get it, but it's going to be a struggle. About a 9 out of 10 is definitely sufficient for hypertrophy and muscle gain, but not destroying your CNS. It should still be very hard. Now, folks on TRT or assisted folks, they can push closer to 10 out of 10 all the time, and they're going to recover and they're going to make gains really fast. But as a general rule of thumb for everybody, I like to tell my clients, hit a 9 out of 10 RPE on most of your sets. And then on the final set of that exercise, go ahead and shoot for a 10 out of 10. Try and get that one extra rep. And that helps people push it to the next level. But if you do that on every single set, the rest of your workout's not, you're going to be trashed. Like at some point, the rest of your workout's not going to be as maximized.
100%. I want to shift gears a little bit into nutrition, because of course we need to touch on nutrition when it comes to recovery and how to optimize our recovery as well. I think, of course, more the space that we're in when it comes to helping people lose weight, being in a calorie deficit in and of itself can sometimes be challenging, because of course that in and of itself is a stressor and is preventing us to really recover optimally. So that would be my first point. If you really, if you're not necessarily tracking macros yet and you feel like you're sore all the time, you don't really know how many calories you're intaking, and you're not concerned about losing weight, making sure that you're actually eating enough to fuel your training would be the first point, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think protein is probably the most important thing that people need to always start with. A friend of mine, Jeremy Mullins, from back at my first form days in the Training Nutrition Truth podcast, he always said start with protein, and that's I kind of adopted that as well, and it's the basic thing that most people need to start with. And I'm pulling my calculator out here too to give me an idea. So here, because I want to know these numbers. Here's what I like to tell people. Now, I might set someone's protein differently because they're my client, and it's going to be based on how much work they're doing, how old they are, how long they've been training. Like all those things matter. But for a general rule of thumb, for a physique enhancement enthusiast, get your body fat checked, right? It doesn't really matter how you check it. Just get somewhere close, right? So you can see about what your lean mass is, the total muscle mass that you have, right? And I like to say, take your lean mass times 1 to 1.25, and that will give you your protein for the day. So I'll just tell you mine here real quick. I just did the math. I've got about 180 pounds of lean mass. I took that times 1.25, and it gives me about 225 grams of protein. That is plenty. That is plenty. Now, if I only did 180 pounds of lean mass times one, that would get me 180 grams of protein a day. I can say for someone my size, that's going to be the minimum. I like to shoot for 1.25. And you can do that for females as well. So if I've got a female that has 100 pounds of lean mass and I take that times 1.25, that's 125 grams of protein a day. Lisa, you work with a lot of females. That's probably pretty sufficient for most females. Like, there's not going to be a ton of females with a lot more than 100 pounds of lean mass, right? Um, so maybe even a female with 120 pounds of lean mass, she's going to be up closer to 150 grams of protein. So that to me is always the way I make sure I tell people maximize your protein first, and then your overall calories are also tied to that. So to me, if there's two top tier things, it's always protein and your total calories. But it's never
Totally.
total calories are more important. It's never protein's more important. It's how much protein are you getting and what are your total calories.
Yeah, and I think it should make sense to people, since protein is literally the building blocks for our body. So if we're talking about, we're more or less, tearing down some of our tissue by strength training. So we need to rebuild that. And what do we need to rebuild it? We need to actually give our body sufficient amount of building blocks. So when it comes to optimizing recovery, though, I do think we need to throw carbs with that in the mix. And of
Yes.
course, taking a ketogenic diet or whatever out of the mix there. But normally speaking, this is when nutrient timing does come in as important. Like, it's not as high as that importance of the hierarchy that you were saying, like calories and protein. Yes, that's way up there. But if we're talking about optimizing, we need to touch on the fact that we need to replenish our glycogen stores, and therefore bunching carbs around training, making sure that, especially if we're in a deficit and we only have a certain amount of carbs to distribute throughout the day, that a good chunk of that is around our training. I think that that's one of the most helpful things we can do as well.
And the research suggests that. A good friend of mine, now I keep thinking back to my first form days and in the TNT podcast from back in like 2016, Dr. Chad Kirksick, good friend of mine. He did the research and he put together the papers for the ISSN on nutrition around training, right? So nutrient timing, and it it all supports performance. But what we also see is it supports muscle retention. When you're dieting down, better recovery. People have seen that over the years, and almost all my athletes, people that are going to step on stage, I have them drinking carbs during their training. Not a ton, but amino acids and carbs, like maybe 20 carbs during their training for a female, maybe 30 for a guy. But I'm like you, Lisa. I prioritize my carbs pre and post workout for clients, because that's when carbs fuel your body, right? Unless you're on a ketogenic diet, carbs fuel your body, they fuel your performance. So it's also when your insulin sensitivity is the best, where you're going to use those carbs as fuel versus more storage outside away from the workout. So it makes sense to put that gas in the gas tank when you need to push the gas pedal down and use the gas, right? So pre and post workout carbs are king. And I like to pair that with whey protein, because there's no better, and it's not because we own a supplement company. It's because there's no better protein source out there with the amino acid content, which you want right around your training to turn growth on, and then let the carbs fuel the process of growth. And I think a lot of people don't know that. Protein, when you take it in, it turns growth on. Carbs fuel the process of growth. So there's been research done where they had someone after their workout have just a whey shake by itself, and it turned growth on, and then it started to come down after 90 minutes. Then they took someone, they had a whey shake, and they paired it up with a carbohydrate. And I can't remember if it was a fast or slow digesting carb. I'm pretty sure it was a slower digesting carb, maybe oatmeal, which would make sense. Muscle growth turned on just like it did with the whey shake, but it extended out to 3 hours instead of 90 minutes, which is what, an hour and a half. So it extended the growth process out. So if you think about that around your training, it's very important to have protein and carbs, because that's when you want to maximize that training window. And everybody says there's no anabolic window, but there's an insulin sensitivity window, and you don't want to sit there and wait to turn muscle growth on after you've just trained. You want to be able to fuel that process. And that's where the protein and carbs together really shine.
Well, and talking about recovery, I mean, we mentioned cortisol earlier. So after training, cortisol is going to be high initially, and
Yeah.
as you said, carbs help blunt that the most by bringing up insulin. So this is actually what we want. So absolutely. Now I guess transitioning from just nutrition overall to supplements, to much more specific supplements, what would be the main supplement if someone says to you, I want to optimize my recovery, my nutrition is set, my training is set, what supplements are going to be the best?
Um, everyone's looking for the sexy stuff. And by the way, we make those. But we make them because they work. I don't want to go there first. I want to talk about, we just talked about whey protein. To me, it's the best source that you can get. Or if you're not going to have whey protein, maybe if you want a vegan protein, right, you need to make sure you have something that's high enough in amino acids to turn on growth. So we actually make a vegan protein powder as well, and it's got brown rice and pea protein, but brown rice has a very high leucine content to it, not like whey, but it's high enough to where you can maximize protein synthesis or at least get it turned on in a sufficient manner. So protein powders to me are very important. And then a multivitamin, a lot of people don't realize multis are important because they fight free radicals and the damage that they cause, especially from training. So having a multivitamin at least once a day, a good, not Centrum and all that cheap shit from Walmart. Don't do that, right? It's you don't put Body Fortress Whey in your body. Don't put Centrum multivitamins in your body. So like a good high quality multivitamin is important to fight free radicals, which get in the way of muscle growth and recovery. So those two are very, very important. Now, if you do want to get sexy, things like Hormone Optimizer that we built that maximize natural testosterone levels and drop cortisol, though that really helps, because now we're going back to the beginning of the show where we're talking about maximizing your total and your free testosterone. Those things, how all my clients that compete take that, and it makes a huge difference. I mean, in labs, but we're not sitting here trying to sell supplements. I'm just saying to maximize your recovery, those are the supplements that will really help.
Yeah, and I mean, even before going to the hormone optimizer, I would throw things like a good omega-3 absolutely out there, like 100% since it's
100%.
anti-inflammatory. So talking about, you're causing inflammation by training. Magnesium, 100% as well, even just, making sure that all your nerve function is there 100%. And then on top of that, creatine, absolutely. So creatine helps shuffle our cells the energy, or helps shuffle the energy back into our cells quicker. So ATP, which is the smallest form of energy, and not just with our muscle cells, but also brain cells, everything else. So creatine for everyone. Those would be, if I had to pick 3 top supplements for optimizing recovery, they would hands down be those 3. You can throw in ashwagandha in terms of stress management, helping your body with that. You can throw in zinc with that. You mentioned a multi, or, on days where you're really sore, also taking a high dose vitamin C. That would be something you could throw in the mix, but that's not something that I would recommend on a daily basis, because we don't want to, while we want to make sure that we're helping the body deal with the inflammation, we don't want to blunt the training
Yeah.
stimulus. So that's why I don't think taking something like a high dose vitamin C all the time is ideal. Now, if you're like me and you don't do a lot of cardio, and suddenly I would decide I'm going to run a half marathon from one day to another, and I'm really sore after that, and I really, really want to get that soreness down as quickly as possible, that's when I would probably pop a couple of grams of vitamin C, and not just
Yeah.
milligrams, but a couple of grams.
Yeah.
But, talking on a daily basis, omega-3, vitamin C, not vitamin C, magnesium, and creatine, absolutely.
100%. And that's the important thing. That's why we work well on this podcast together, because you hitting it from a nutritionist standpoint. Something like Hormone Optimizer, maybe not everybody needs that, right? And we're definitely not saying that, but fish oil, huge. Creatine, there's no better research supplement literally in the industry. Like, to me, the top 2 that everyone should be taking listening to the show are whey protein, creatine. Like, you can't beat those. So yeah, that's probably a well-rounded list. I think everybody can maximize their recovery on.
For sure. And I guess I'm adding on to the point that I was just making, in the sense of when we want to get like when we just know we need to recover as quickly as possible because we overdid it. Like most of the people listening to this will have had a training day where they just pushed it too hard and they just know, okay, I'm either going to be out for a couple of days or I need to do something to recover better. So in those instances, we often think of things like massages, of going to the sauna, a hot tub, a cold plunge, whatever. And cold plunges have become quite popular these days. And I don't necessarily like, or at least from the research that's out at the moment, it shows that if we do that too soon after our training, it can actually blunt hypertrophy. And most people listening to this, we want as much hypertrophy as possible. So I would not recommend something like a cold plunge after every training session. If anything, it is recommended to do that, do your cold plunge in the morning for whatever you wanted for your dopamine release, whatever, immune function or so, and then you're training well in the afternoon, yes. But on a different spectrum, like if we have an athlete or someone like Leslie, let's say she's competing in a CrossFit competition and it's a 2-day competition. And after the first day, she's super, super sore. What can we do to get her recovering quickly, getting that inflammation down? Cold plunge in that instance is worth gold.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to touch on those, that the cold plunge, since it's been talked about so much. I don't know if you have anything to throw into the hat on that front.
I'm a big baby. I don't like the way it hits my man parts when I get in the cold water like that. I mean, I don't know how it feels for women, but it just does not feel good. So I'm a big baby. And I will say that I did 2 weeks of cold showers and I somewhat felt a difference. I didn't really I needed less caffeine, which was nice because I did get a dopamine response. But, I think overall, for people that have really bad inflammation, like arthritic knees, for example, like there might be a place for maybe cold plunging from the knees down, or, people that have Achilles tendon issues and a lot of inflammation there. Like you brought up Leslie, like with jump ropes, she was doing so many of those and running, like she got a really bad inflamed Achilles. So I think there's times and places for that. But it's like anything that we see in the sport. You see somebody like Joe Rogan or you see somebody else and they're cold plunging every day and they're talking about how fucking hardcore they are and it's this and that. And like everybody wants to be hardcore. So then you see people take it to the extreme. And you've got to remember inflammation's there for a reason. Like we don't want to do everything we can to just try and crush it, like taking things like ibuprofen after your workout and stuff like that all the time. Like there's a place for inflammation. We just don't want chronically elevated inflammation. But that's a whole
That's
other
right.
podcast in and of itself.
I mean, again, otherwise you're not getting that adaptation that we're
Mm-hmm.
actually after, that super compensation, essentially.
Yeah.
I just briefly want to, we talked about this before we started recording, but I just briefly want to talk about things like, massage or foam rolling or stretching or so as well. So essentially what the research actually says when it comes to that is that there is no real proven benefit to those things except for you taking the time to do nothing during that time. So what that says to me is not actually something negative. It actually says whatever method you personally like that is downregulatory, that helps you switch from that sympathetic activated state in your nervous system during training to a parasympathetic state of your nervous system more quickly, do that. If you are someone who enjoys foam rolling, if you're someone who enjoys getting a massage on a regular basis, or doing some stretches, or even just doing some down regulatory breathing or so, do that. Like the point is just like do something. I think it's if doing 5 minutes or 10 minutes of something down regulatory after training is better than nothing. Now, I also think that belief plays a lot into that, because someone might say, oh, but you can't tell me that I don't feel better after getting a massage. It feels relaxed, you have that tissue work and so on. So it might also just be that physical touch and whatever, but from a pure scientific point of view, there's not a whole lot saying you need to get a massage on a regular basis in order to optimize your recovery.
Yeah, and that flies in the face of everything that we've all been taught and believe. And it's one of those things, you're right. Like the research is, and that's why I kind of deferred to you on this. With foam rolling, I will say there's the time and place where I've seen it be beneficial, not necessarily for recovery, but beneficial is, you have a lot of people, and this goes back to the powerlifting world, right? Or you're getting up there in your training age. And say you're having trouble engaging your glutes, for example, sometimes it's nice to be able, before your workout, roll your glutes out so they can fire and activate a little bit better. And I know, this is a little bit graphic, but being on TRT now for 5 years, having to take injections in my glutes like a couple times a week for 5 years, like you build up scar tissue. And that's just part of it, right? It's part of the medication that I have to take. My doctor's like, this is what you need. So foam rolling, back when I was really training for like powerlifting and things like that, it helped me engage my glutes. So it helped with my strength. I had better workouts. I could feel things better. But from a recovery standpoint, I think it plays a better role to do it before, just to help you with your training. So as far as
Yeah.
everything else, I'm not the expert. So
No, in terms of getting into a certain range of motion or
yeah,
improving your range of motion, I 100% agree. Um, I do think we need to talk about the probably most underrated recovery tool out there.
by far.
And fortunately, it is getting a little bit out there, that whole message. But yeah, by far, if we could optimize one thing for everyone, it would probably be sleep, wouldn't it?
Take your asses to bed, people. Like, trust me, it's the number one thing I have to work with my clients on. It is the number one thing I fight with my clients on. I just had an email back and forth with a client of mine I've been working with for a long time, and his name is Michael, and he's probably listening. And I said, "Hey man, listen, there's only one way around this. Like, his goal is to be in bed 7.5 hours, at least in bed total of 7.5 hours. That doesn't mean asleep, but he has these other goals that we're working on, right? And he's turning 44. Matter of fact, I think it's today as we're recording. And I just told him, I said, hey, listen, Michael, that's not going to cut it. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, if you have to cut out your training in the morning to move it in the afternoon to where you can sleep in and get an extra 30, 45 minutes or an hour, none of that matters. We're all busy. We all have XYZ going on. We all have our reasons. If you don't get sleep, nothing is going to work, period. So you have to make that your utmost highest priority. And I know there's a lot of people say, I survive off 6.5 hours of sleep. I don't give a fuck if you survive. You're not going to get the results and the recovery that you need. And it's easier for me to say because I own my own businesses and I make my schedule in the morning and I'm telling everybody I get 9 hours of sleep. Not everyone's in the position to be able to do that. They've got kids they got to get up and go to school. And listen, I get my 17-year-old up and I'm making waffles and I go right back to bed, right? So I'm up for like 10 minutes, I give him a hug, see him out the door, and I'm right. Not everyone can do that. But my point is, if you don't have the time, you have to make the time. There's no other way around it. To me, there's three things. There's training, nutrition, and there's sleep. And to me, I really think sleep may just edge everything out. It may be probably the most important because if your training and nutrition's on point, but your sleep's not, you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to get anywhere. And it's just not sexy. And everyone wants to kind of poo-poo it and oh well, whatever. And no one does it. It's fucking free. It's free. You don't have to buy whey protein. You don't have to buy creatine. You don't have to buy a gym membership. Just go to freaking sleep. And it's not that easy, right? Like people's brains are wired, they're stressed out. Part of it's mental stress, which we're going to talk a little bit about. I mean, that's all I can say about it. Like, you guys have to get 8 hours of sleep. I'm sorry, but like, you need to be asleep 8 hours. Like, you just have to.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's when all the recovery processes are really optimized. And also, I mean, we could get into the details of hormones here, but human growth hormone, et cetera, is the most elevated during that time, like generally speaking. And it's just your biggest opportunity to really optimize things. But yeah, I guess as a last point, when it comes to the stress perception thing, I I once again going back to the sympathetic and parasympathetic arm of the nervous system, the more we can counter our high training stress that we're trying to elicit here, or like basically put onto our body, the more we can counter that with more time in a parasympathetic state throughout the day, the better. So if you said we all have busy days, yes, but busy is one thing. How you perceive that, how you mentally, if you tell yourself, oh, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm so stressed out, I have never have time for this and this and this and this, it's a whole different thing than if you have that same amount of workload and you tell yourself, this is a privilege, I'm enjoying this, I'm doing something good, I'm impacting my family in a good way. Yes, I might be going from A to B to C to not having much quote unquote free time in between that, but how we view things plays a big role, and then hopefully helps us with sleep as well.
Yeah, it's, going back to the client of mine, Michael, that I was talking about. His is definitely not a perceived stress. His is definitely real. The guy's an entrepreneur. He's lived in New York, in Chicago now, and he works his tail off. He's constantly reinventing himself in his business to keep growing and getting better. And he's I would say type A, in a good way, though, even though he's pretty chill at the same time. And he's constantly go, 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 go. So his schedule is filled up so much with everything that he has. It literally comes down to letting something else go so he can make room for sleep. So it's not like the guy's not doing a good job. It's something where he's going to have to manually take something out. Now, the opposite of that is what we're talking about now. I have a lot of people, they stress themselves out. It's the way they look at everything. They look at it as like, I have to do this instead of I get to do this. And I made a post on that not too long ago. And as we all get older and we go through some different health scares, or we go through injuries, or we go through life events, right? Like all these things, everything changes, and the research supports this, by the way. Like, if we want to get real nerdy with this, your perception of what your stress is totally changes your outlook. So if you start looking at things like I get to do this instead of I have to do this, your stress goes down. And I see people that just can't sleep because they are constantly stressed out. And those are the clients, and I can see it in their emails, right? There's lots of exclamation points, and they're constantly rushing, and hey, I'm sorry, this is a late email, and blah blah blah. Like, they're rush, 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 and they're constantly mentally stressing themselves out. They're the hardest ones to get results for. Hands down is the stressed out. And it's a lot of it's the way they look at things, honestly. I'm not a psychologist, but it works for me to kind of step back and just be grateful instead of worrying about what I don't get to do, or does that make sense?
Yeah, I think like gratitude is such a big point, but also like you say, like letting go of the things we can't control anyway. I think those are also the people that stress about the things that you can't influence, and they let whatever politics and whatever else influence them so
Jeez,
much, stress them
yes.
out, where you're like, this is something you don't, at least not to that level, you don't need to be concerned with that much. But yeah, going off on a side rant here.
Yeah, well,
I
you know
totally
what? We've got a coach. We've got a coach on the team, and I love the guy. He's a good friend of mine. I know he's listening. He likes politics, and sometimes he'll send me, not really, I don't let anybody send me political shit because I don't want to see it. Like, don't even send it to me. But sometimes this guy, he's a very positive guy. He'll send me other negative stuff that people are posting on the internet that's kind of tied to us. And it's more of like a, hey, I just want to keep you aware. I don't want to see any of that shit. And I just tell him, I'm like, hey man, nothing good is going to come from looking at that shit. It's very toxic, or it's low key passive aggressive. I don't want to see any of it. You know why? I can't do anything to change any of that. So I just eliminate it, literally eliminate it. And I notice he stresses himself out from time to time with that kind of stuff. But we had a lot of drama. It wasn't our fault that we had to go through not too long ago. I just told him, hey man, I don't want to hear about any of it. Like, I don't want to hear or see any of it. So I just totally eliminate it. So with social media, it's in front of you, but you've got the choice. What kind of
exactly.
stuff are you watching the news? Are you getting stressed out about the economy? Like, all these different things, like media, and they're spread into social media. They make money by scaring you and stressing you out. Like, that's how they monetize you. So I
Keep
just
your
eliminate it.
Yeah, exactly. Keep your environment, and that includes the social media environment, positive. That's totally my philosophy as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, I hope we've been able to give people a nice overview of what they can do, where they should tackle their recovery first, or what they can do in order to optimize their recovery. Of course, as always, if people have questions or follow-up ideas, thoughts, then please reach out to us. We love hearing from all of you. Our next episode is going to be a Q&A, which we're actually excited about. We haven't done one of those since like August last year, since I jumped on board. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. We've got so many questions. If you guys ever want to send questions in and you want to be anonymous or we'll shout your name out, it doesn't matter. Just see the show notes. You've got my email, Lisa's email, anything that you guys need. If you're watching on YouTube, if you have any questions over any of this stuff, throw it in the comments. We will get to it and we will answer it. And this has been a fun episode. I know we've got one that we're getting ready to record. We got a question of the week coming up. You want to let people know what's coming next?
It's going to be how to start a ketogenic diet.
Oh yeah, how to cut all the carbs out of your diet and just love life. That's what we're going to talk about. So, just kidding. It's going to be it'll be a nice short one, but we're going to get to that for myself and Lisa. You guys have a great day. See you later.
See you. Bye.